So the webinar will last about 55 minutes. I'm going to introduce my beautiful guests for today. So with me, I have Andrea Zions, and her role is as a post-secondary educator. Both of my guests are based in Canada and have a strong background in education. So Andrea, program evaluation and assessment, research, classroom instruction, curriculum design, and focusing on students with disabilities to succeed academically, such an important role that you perform. And also studying to become an educational psychologist at the University of Toronto. It sounds like you are absolutely chock-a-block in your diary. That sounds like a lot of work, Andrea, and you're managing to do independent research projects around all of that as well. So well done you. That's real professionalism. I'm going to introduce Hayley as well. So Hayley is an adaptive technologist and specialist at Accessible Learning Services Department at Mohawk College. And she has worked directly with students and adults with disabilities to facilitate their academic, social and cultural development. Another really, really important job, and we appreciate all you do. Thank you. So Hayley's also in the business of studying, and she's just finished her, or just received her MA, her Master of Education from Brock University. And her research is focused on barriers to support for students with disabilities in higher education. And that leads us nicely to our webinar this afternoon, which is about those barriers and transition points. So I understand that both of you work together and have worked together. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you're going to be
together both at Mohawk and through the Accessible Learning Lab, and we've worked together to put the presentation together. And thank you for having us today.
You're welcome. Very excited to hear. I am particularly about the Accessible Learning Lab in the UK, which is where I'm based and hosting this presentation from. We don't have accessible learning labs. We don't have that kind of expertise. In fact, I was talking to somebody from the University of Dundee this week who is has created and is now running the first MA education in assistive technology, first one in the UK in Dundee, which launched in January. So very exciting for us in the UK, but when through our discussions, I can't help feel that we're a bit far behind you guys. You seem to know what you're doing and have already assimilated this information to support people through their learning journeys and through transition points. And as a teacher, I know that getting students through transition is the most crucial part of what we can do to ensure that they continue to be successful as learners. So I'm looking forward to hearing your talk about that today, and so we can learn a lot from you and create some models on the basis of what you're doing really well, right? I'm sure that's what we need to do. Okay, I'm going to make myself go dark, but that doesn't mean I've gone away. I should be here if you need me. So take it away, ladies. I'm really looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
So I just wanted to say thank you, Julia, for that beautiful introduction. And both Hayley and I are very excited to be here. We're a little bit remorseful that we're presenting in England from our own basements and houses, but nonetheless, that's just the way it is today. And really what we'd like to do today is something that our department, Accessible Learning Services at Mohawk College, calls elevating the discourse around transition and accessibility. We really believe in sharing information and highlighting the ways that we can all work together to support students with disabilities. So today it's about transitions and what we can do to work together and further knowledge to support students. And since Julia did a great job introducing us, just to reiterate, I'm Andrea Zions, and this is my colleague, Hayley Bloxham.
Hi, everybody. Do we want to start with our survey, Andrea?
We do. Thank you, Hayley, for reminding me.
No problem. So I'm going to pop up a survey, and we're hoping you can take a couple of seconds just to answer the questions that we've got here. If I believe it should be open now, if you're able to start answering. I see answers coming in. That's wonderful. We'll give it a minute just for everybody to put their answers in, and then we'll take a look at the population we've got here today.
Okay, so let's have a look. It seems that we have quite a few high school educators here, special education professionals and post-secondary professionals. Most people are using assistive technology already in their teaching. And it seems that everybody here supports students transitioning between post-secondary and secondary school. So it seems like there's a lot of similar interests here. Thank you for letting us know that. So we have an agenda today, and the first thing we would like to do is provide you with a bit of a tour of what the post-secondary setting is like in Ontario. We'd also like to share with you how we assess and train students for assistive technology usage in the post-secondary setting.
Then we wanted to talk about some of the gaps and barriers that we face with adaptive technology in the post-secondary setting, and talk about the transition to post-secondary and what your role can be in supporting these students as they transition.
So we'd like to begin with a little bit of a tour. We're cognizant of the fact that we're talking to people today from a wide range of different locations, and the word college and university might be interpreted differently from wherever you are located. So we wanted to share with you what college means here in Ontario. So we're located in Hamilton, Ontario, which is in Canada. And we have both colleges, publicly funded colleges, and publicly funded universities, and they can be very different. Colleges tend to offer more diplomas and certificates, while a university is more of a master's, a bachelor's, and something that leads to higher education.
Now, we often hear in Canada anyway that you go to university to get an education, but you go to college to get a career. College is almost like the finishing school for university, and I know for me that's true. I've done both university and college education. College is a lot more hands-on, and it's really to provide you with the skills and also placement opportunities to support your chosen career path. I would be interested to know what it's like, if it's similar where you're located. And I think this is now maybe a good opportunity to just let you know that we do have the chat feature open, and we also have a Q&A mode as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to type in the chat, and we'll monitor it as we go through the presentation. And I think there's some time at the end for Q&A as well if needed.
So the post-secondary setting in Ontario is we want to lay a bit of the groundwork so you understand the conditions we work under. And we believe some of it is very similar to the conditions you're probably working under. So for the first important thing to know is that accessibility for students with disabilities is both mandated and legislated. So it's protected, and so are services like assistive technology. So our department exists to provide accommodations and supports for students with disabilities, and that is similar across all publicly funded post-secondary institutions in Ontario and Canada. And we know that is more than likely to be very similar to the structure in the US. And I believe even in the UK, there are some similarities. We also happen to have the way assistive technology is provided at the college setting is either through an accessible learning lab, which is connected to accessible learning services, or some colleges and universities have a centralized location in which they provide assistive technology in a much more universal fashion, and it can be in a library or within a student success center, and sometimes it can even be in both. So we happen to also have assistive technology in our library as well. We also wanted to share that the outcomes are very different in the post-secondary setting and in the secondary setting. So when you're teaching high school and you're providing assistive technology or accommodations, it's often for success. You want to see students graduate. You want to see students do well with the curriculum. You want to promote success. Whereas in this post-secondary setting, it's not, the focus isn't so much on success, but we want everybody to be successful. The focus is really on providing equal opportunity to everybody. So we provide assistive technology so they have access and equal opportunity to curriculum and things like that. So it's not the focus on success, but on opportunity.
We also have a very diverse student population, and really we have students from all walks of life. A number of students are in fact coming from high school, but then we also do have mature students. And Andrea told me the other day, she actually had a student in her 80s who was attending our institution, which is wonderful to hear. We may also have some students who are going to their second career, whether they've been hurt on the workplace or they're just looking to develop some new skills and go into another career path. And we also do have a number of international students with us as well. The college system is also very student-driven. Really, students control their education here. They must reach out in order to register with Accessible Learning Services and to make appointments with both Andrea and I to support their adaptive technology needs. And we aren't chasing them down if they don't show up. It's really kind of their initiative and their prerogative to do so. I also wanted to mention that time is a really big consideration for our students. Usually in college, they're taking 7-8 courses in a semester, and that's a very heavy schedule, and it can be challenging to kind of fit in other appointments or other commitments as well. And a lot of students go on placements too, which make it challenging to arrange other appointments. So when we think about the typical student who's accessing or using adaptive technology when they come to the post-secondary setting, they're often thinking, I want it fixed now. It's something that I need immediately. Their behavior is, it's a one and done thing. I want to come in, I want to get my problem solved and move on. Everything will be great. And their expectation is usually, this is going to be easy. It's not too much of an investment, which we, for those who work with adaptive technology, know is often not true.
So knowing that we have a lot of diversity and a lot of time constraints, we actually provide a wide range of training choices for students. We have an independent lab, and most colleges will have some place students can go in and work with the assistive technology independently. A lot of people are independent learners. We also provide a wide range of workshops on learning strategies and assistive technology. And typically, one of the most popular things we do is provide one-to-one appointments, and we do assistive technology training and assessments.
We also have a lot of online modules and video opportunities for students to access. And as I mentioned, their schedules can be quite busy. So having these available whenever they have some free time is a great way to access our resources. We also do have some curriculum-specific content. So, for example, we know that the apprentices that are at our institution really like the scanning pen because it's compact, it's discreet, and it works well when they're on the job. And we also do provide workshops and presentations to a number of different classes on campus as well.
So the way we were connected with the scanning pen is we did some research with the reader pen. The research actually focused on seeing if we could increase engagement with the scanning pen for testing. We wanted to see if students who struggled with reading would do how they would do if we introduced the reading pen to them for testing. We were interested specifically in the testing center. So we actually set up 3 different conditions. They had appointments, we had online modules, and we had workshops for them. And we wanted to see which would create the greatest amount of success with the pen, adoption of the pen, and the workshop was the winner. And the reason we found that the workshop was the most successful way, more engagement than the online modules or even the appointments, whereas all conditions fostered adoption of the technology. We found that the students who were part of the workshop actually engaged in a greater engagement with all of their accommodations in the testing center. And when we look back at that, we were able to go through some of the things that were happening in the workshops, and students were sharing with each other how they were using technology, how they were booking tests. And we realized that the workshops actually created a sense of community, and that is what created the engagement. And so we just wanted to give you a bit of an idea of the circumstances we're working under. And even though we found that the workshops were really helpful and the students enjoyed them, we still struggle with getting people to come to our workshops. And that's part of what we want to talk about when we share with you some of the gaps, the barriers, and ways you can help us with transition. The next thing we want to talk about is assessment and training. So we really work with Joy Zabala's set theory. And for those of you who are familiar, set theory it's really a framework or a model of how you think about assistive technology and students. And you don't have to go in any particular order, but when you're doing a match, this is a way to kind of communicate and figure out which type of technology works best in the environment for the specific student, for the specific task, and the specific tool. And I once read that Joy Zabala said that if the student comes back and you need to work with them again, you can reset. So we want to share with you how we work our way through the set theory as we meet with students.
So we'll start by talking about the first component of set theory, which is our students. And you'll notice that we do offer a number of different programs at Mohawk. As you can see by this list, it's not necessarily all of the programs, but just some of kind of the main ones that we see. And students in each program have many different skills, strengths, and areas of challenge that they may need some additional support. For example, a student in the computer engineering program or the graphic design program may have stronger computer literacy skills than, let's say, just for example, somebody in a math program. And that's a generalization. I know that's not true for everybody. There's also a number of other variables that we want to take into consideration when we think about the student. Their computer and digital literacy skills, how comfortable are they with the computer or different technology that they're using? What technology do they already have? Are they working on a computer? I've heard a lot of students right now, especially in the online environment, are using their smartphone, so a really small device. It's also important to kind of look at their self-report. What are their interests? What have they already used? What are their strengths and what are their challenges? And what do they want to try? It's important to kind of incorporate their interests as well. And then their reading skill, their writing skills, those levels are important to know as well. Let's see where we're kind of starting.
We also put down disability, and the reason we put down disability as a student variable is we find that in the post-secondary setting, we work with a wider range of disabilities than you might meet in the secondary setting, in the high school setting. And part of that is because students with mental health disabilities may not be diagnosed till later. Some disabilities actually occur or get recognized later on in life. We also deal with a lot of people who have had workplace injuries who are now returning, car accidents, so maybe they've got some form of acquired brain injury. So some disabilities, typically get seen and worked with in the secondary school level, and then some of them actually are just recognized or even develop later. So we have a wider range of students we might work with. And we also want to point out that in the listed variables, we did not mention IEP and psych eds and disability as a specific way to prescribe technology. Doesn't mean we don't access their IEP or look at their psychoeducational assessments, but we don't necessarily take a very prescriptive approach. So, it could recommend one type of technology, but a student doesn't have the kind of technology to support that, or they don't have the interest or the program. So we really spend a lot of time on self-reports and getting to know the student.
The second consideration in the set theory is the environment that the student is working in. So are they on a co-op or a work placement?
They could also be an apprentice, and they could be working in a refrigerator somewhere or on a rooftop or fixing a sink.
Online or in person, we're seeing a lot more online right now, and we've seen a lot of challenges or changes in the last couple of months.
And then when we think about assistive technology, we also have to think about, are they going to be using it in the study hall? Will they be in the library? Does that impact other people if we provide them with technology that is loud?
Alternatively, there's the lecture hall where it can be quite loud. And if students are, for example, using a digital recorder to record the lecture, they'll have to make sure that they have a seat available for them at the front of the classroom.
And then, as I mentioned, we have a testing center. And when we train students to use technology in the testing center, we need to make sure they're independent, that they can use it without, there will be nobody to help them in the testing center. The expertise of the testing center is testing, not assistive technology. We need to make sure that they have a room if they're going to be using something like speech to text, or they're going to be listening to their a pen or something. They need to have earphones, or they need to have a quiet space.
And finally, we've also mentioned the lab. Usually labs are fast-paced, you're working in potentially groups, and say a student has, for example, a text-to-speech program that they need to use, the rest of the students may not want to wait or have the time or the flexibility to be able to wait for the student who is using that text-to-speech program.
So you can see that the environment, there's a lot of considerations, and we try to work through that with students. It could be a messy environment, and quite literally you could be in a preschool setting and you don't want to bring out your laptop or your iPad.
It could also be a loud setting, and in that case, headphones may be required in order to properly listen to the technology that you're using.
And students often share with us that one of their considerations is the power source. So if we provide them with technology or we loan them a laptop and there isn't an available power source, that's one of the first questions they have for us is, where will I be able to sit and how close will I be to a power source? We have a lot of brand new classrooms where power sources are available to everybody, but in some of the older classrooms that may not be possible.
Privacy and confidentiality is also really important. We're starting to see a lot more students using their smartphones. And if you think about a nursing student, for example, they're in the hospital and they need to use their app in order to read a chart properly. You don't really want to be that patient that wakes up and sees a student with their phone and your chart, right? That doesn't work. So there's many considerations in that sense that we have to think of too.
And then finally, we have really begun to recognize, thanks to this lockdown and the pandemic, is that the online and the virtual is a unique environment in and of itself.
So the third consideration in the set theory is the task that the student has to complete. So we want to know what the student has to do and what are the challenges that they face or what are they struggling with that task.
So I'll give you a little example. So when we talk with students about the task, we often think about what is the purpose of what they need to do, what skills do they currently have, and what are the gaps that they have in their skills. So we're just going to talk about two similar students, both in a program called Office Administration. Office Administration is a program where students get a certificate. They learn how to work in a medical office, a legal office, or even an executive type of office. So we had two students and very similar types of activities. One student, and they both were struggling with reading. One student was learning medical terminology, because one of the things you might do at working in a medical field is transcribing doctor's notes or doing billing. So you need to know the medical terminology. Now, this student had stronger skills in terms of reading, but she was really struggling with the actual words that she needed to learn for the terminologies, because they can be quite difficult and they're Latin. So she actually found that the scanning pen was a perfect fit for her, and she learned to scan the words, listen to the pronunciation, use the dictionary sometimes, but that was all she needed to do really well in her course. Now, you can compare that to another student who has very similar, is looking to do something very similar in a similar type course, but then they may be lacking some more basic reading skills. So for that student, the reading pen wasn't enough, and we helped them with, using a different type of text to speech. They had to, access more material. They needed to be able to listen in a wider range of settings. And so for that student, the gap was greater and the skills and the purpose of what they were trying to do was completely different. And so the task was different.
So we've talked a lot so far about how we support students with adaptive technology in the post-secondary setting, but we also wanted to provide you with some examples of the programs and the technology that our students have access to. So you may be familiar with some of these programs, and I would be interested to know if you've used any of them or which ones you have used. So feel free to type in the chat if you're familiar with any of them. But we do have a number of text-to-speech programs like Kurzweil, number of different Chrome extensions that we can train students on, Immersive Reader that is part of Microsoft, and the scanning pen as well. Speech-to-text, we've got Dragon as an example. And then we have some other note-taking programs like Glean and Note-Taking Express, which record the lectures. And then in Glean, the students have the ability to type their notes in a really easy, nice platform. And then with Note-Taking Express, there's the option to actually send the recording to a note taker and have an outline or a summary sent back within usually about 24 to 48 hours. And then kind of a new one to us, which is actually working out really well, is called Mindomo. And it's an online tool to create mind maps as a way to study or organize student notes as well. And I see somebody in the chat wrote that they use Read and Write and Equatio as part of text help, and they're amazing programs. I agree.
Yeah. And we actually, when we talk about the difference between online and virtual, so one of the things that we had to do as a result of the pandemic was work and establish a reading device for our online learning management system. So, you can have a lot of these things will embed within our learning management system, but then we also had to make sure that our learning management system, which is, like, I guess the equivalent would be like your Google Classroom, but we have Canvas. I think Canvas is also popular in the UK and across the US. It also has embedded features so that students can listen to their testing, and they can also listen to their PowerPoints and anything that they're looking at.
We have a couple other people writing in the chat that they're familiar with Kurzweil, Dragon, and the Reading Pen, Google Voice typing. Awesome. And that's the thing too. I think there's so many different types of technology available. I often, when I'm meeting with students, will say, kind of based on the assessment and their self-report, we'll start with this technology, but just because we're starting with it doesn't mean it's our ending point. We can evolve over time. Your preferences or your needs may change. So it's not a one and done, like we kind of mentioned at the beginning. So the final T is tools in the set theory. So we want to know what technology is a student currently using, or what do they own, and what are their preferences as well. For example, are they a Mac user or are they a PC user? I know for personal, I use a Mac, but for work, I use a PC. And there can be challenges with both. We're starting to see that Mac is kind of taking into their own hands some of the accessibility features, which is awesome, but then it does come with some barriers because sometimes our programs don't necessarily work with Macs, unfortunately, or they're not compatible.
And one of the things that we happen to have at Mohawk College is we have an extensive loaning library for assistive technology. So there really isn't any reason for any student who requires assistive technology to not access assistive technology. And we also work with bursaries that the province gives students with disabilities to be able to purchase assistive technology once they have been trained on assistive technology. Now, part of our assistive technology loaning library means we've invested in a lot of licenses. So we've talked about things like Note-Taking Express, Glean, which happens to be from the UK, is a license. Now, some of the licenses that we offer students, because they were set up before the pandemic, a student might need to be on campus to be able to access, or on a computer that belongs to the school to access. So we need to also work with these variables when we're trying to figure out what a student is going to use. And so one of the things we did at the beginning of the pandemic is we set up a VPN. So any student who wants to access licenses that they previously would have needed to be at the college campus for can now do that from their home by logging in and using a VPN. We also look at variables like how great is the bandwidth at your home? How well is your internet? We know from students if they have poor internet and we set them up with a program that they have to wait to, it's glitchy and it keeps stopping, that's almost a disaster. They just are not going to use the technology.
So as we move into the gaps and barriers, time for training is a huge one. Students have very busy schedules. They've got a lot on the go. They're often on placements. And so we know that the amount of time it takes for training is a challenge. It's not always that one and done appointment. They may need multiple appointments. So getting them in and getting them in consistently can be a challenge.
Another challenge, and this relates to time for training, is cognitive load. And we're only really now becoming more and more aware of the role that cognitive load plays in learning assistive technology. So the very first time that we tried to run the reader pen research in the testing center, we kind of just, did very quick training, gave the student the pen and sent them to the testing center. But one of the things that happened is it was not successful. It was not a successful change to using the reader pen. We began to realize through research and talking, some of the work that I've been doing at University of Toronto has really focused on the role that cognitive load creates for students when they're learning assistive technology. So if you think about it, if you're a student who's already struggling with, let's say, reading, and now I've got to listen to this voice. I've now layered another load to my brain. I've got to listen to this voice. It doesn't hit my head properly. It's a little bit off. It doesn't sound fluent, like it's a human voice, that increases my cognitive load. If there's buttons or there's things I've got to remember to click or upload, I've now increased my cognitive load. And when you start increasing cognitive load for people, they actually do poorer. So if you just give somebody something and you send them into a testing center, which is a high stakes situation, you're taking a test, they're not going to enjoy that. They're not going to find that to be a beneficial experience. And that was one of the things we looked at when we did the workshops, is how do we decrease cognitive load? How, you've got to listen to this voice. We gave those instructions to both our appointment and our workshop. You've got to listen to the voice. You've got to get used to the voice. You need to be familiar with these settings. And that was something that we find to be a gap when we train, is we need to be able to convey the necessity to give yourself enough time to reduce cognitive load.
Time in program is also a big one. In college, most programs are 1 to 2 years, so they're really fast paced. And students don't always necessarily register with Accessible Learning Services at the beginning of their program. They can register at any time throughout their education. So if students are registering in a 1-year program, halfway through their program, we've got a very short period of time to get them up and running with the technology that they need to kind of finish off their program.
And when it comes to understanding, I always find it really interesting, but if you ask students, they're transitioning in from high school, and you ask them if they've ever used assistive technology, and we have access to their IEPs, and we see that assistive technology was used, what was recommended. We see their psychoeds, which says that they should be training on assistive technology. And when you ask students if they've used assistive technology, they kind of look at you really blank, and they don't know what that term means. So we find that there's this gap, and it's actually around a lot of things. Right now I'm doing the accessibility counseling role, and a lot of times I'll say, do you know what accommodations are? And again, we find that there's these gaps in understanding as students transition from high school to the post-secondary setting in terms of some of the supports that they've used and what these things should mean to them.
Kind of tying into what Andrea said, the names of the programs that the students are using and the terminology that is used as you're using the programs is really important. And we often find that students don't necessarily know the names of the programs. So I'll often have students come in and say, you know what, I used a text-to-speech program before, and they kind of explain the features of it or what it looked like, and we can maybe figure out together what it was called, but they don't always know the names of what they're using.
And the other thing, and this is also something that not only do we see, but we also read about a lot in the literature around assistive technology, there tends to be a stigma attached to it. I don't know if it's the word assistive, but certainly we have some students who come in from high school and they say, oh, I was a laptop kid, or I was one of those kids who I was given an iPad. So they sort of see, where the idea of using a laptop or an iPad should be exciting and it should be in addition to your schoolwork. Sometimes it means I have a special educational need, and I've been given this because I need this. So there is some stigma. Again, we're dealing with adult learners, so sometimes that stigma is not there and they're excited to share what they're doing. And it depends, again, on the program they're in and the kind of how comfortable they're sharing or displaying something associated with the disability in front of others, but it can be a stigmatizing experience.
Andrea, this may be a good chance to talk about one of the questions that's in the chat.
Please.
So Adam wrote, what methods have you found helpful in encouraging students who are reluctant to adopt AT? Specifically, as a high school teacher, I have students worried about the way they are viewed by their peers.
That is a great question. And it's something we really, truly struggle with as well. I think the thing that will shape this as we move forward is that we're moving, and I think it's also happening in the industry as well. We're not just saying you've got to use Kurzweil, you've got to use Dragon, you've got to use this because you have special needs. I think what's happening and is happening in the field is we're starting to embrace a wide range of technologies, and Google is supplying them, Apple is supplying them, Microsoft is supplying them. Technology is becoming more and more embedded in student experience. And one of the things that I've often thought from where I sit in the post-secondary setting is we still have this really big gap between how things are happening in post-secondary, or at least I know this is happening in Ontario, and the way students are learning in secondary. So, when students come here, they're not using paper and pencil. They're not taking tests with paper and pencil. They're doing so much more online. There's so much more opportunity to be learning how to use technology, and I mean like a wide range of technology from earlier on. And I think when we become more universally designed for the way we embed technology, the types of technologies we're using, we just will create a greater range of experience for people around technology. We often find that students who benefit from text to speech, well, we have this narrow image of it. But if you're a high school teacher, I bet you might find that text to speech works for a lot of other people as well. I mean, simply, you could be a new to English. You could be an English language learner. You could be somebody who likes to walk and you're an experiential type of learner, kinesthetic, and you want to get on a treadmill and listen to your textbook. So I think when we start to expand and we start to think about technology differently, then we'll also start to reduce some of that stigma. But it is still very present, and it's difficult to work with.
I think too, we're seeing now, especially with the pandemic, that companies that are providing this technology are changing things and they're evolving very quickly. They've evolved over the last couple of months significantly to support the online learning environment. And things like apps are becoming a lot more present. They seem to be a bit more user-friendly, kind of discreet on students' phones. Everybody has them. And I've noticed a lot more of that as we're kind of moving into the online learning.
But it's
hopefully
that's a problem.
Yeah, for sure. The last experience that I wanted, or the gaps and barrier that I wanted to mention, is poor quality adaptive technology experiences. And unfortunately, we do see these sometimes. An example that I can share with you is we've met with some students who have used speech-to-text programs, text-to-speech programs in high school. And instead of having an alternative format, which would be having your textbook changed into a digital PDF copy so that you can then upload it into your program on your computer, the students were having to take their physical textbooks and scanning each page themselves in order to be able to put it into the platform, which takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And that, of course, can be quite a negative experience for a student, and they may not want to continue using that program, or they may not be willing to see kind of what else is out there because they've had that past negative experience. But as we said, things are evolving quickly, so things do change and they do become better.
And I think this really leads to the question that we all share. And the question is, how do we teach this? So Haley and I just share with you this really great global way that we think of assistive technology training, but students don't want to come to workshops and they don't have the time to come in for training, and the idea of cognitive load and reducing it and putting the amount of time in that's needed. We definitely have some assistive technology users that are like our top assistive technology users, and they probably would be with or without us. But there are a whole bunch of other students out there that we just feel we could be doing a better job reaching. And we find that sometimes there's a gap in the conversation. So how do we frame what you need to do to be able to be successful with technology? I've often found I struggle, a student comes to me and they want to learn about, text to speech or how they can listen to their textbooks. Well, the conversation is not really about text to speech. The conversation is about literacy. But how do I explain that to a student who really just wants to be able to get through this course, get some of this reading done? Because it's not about literacy to them at that point. They've struggled with reading for so many years, and I have a totally different vantage point about what literacy is. So we really struggle with how do we translate this for students? How do we explain what study skills are, or the reason to do this, or how wonderful it is to feel that you've planned out your work, or that you're organized, or that you've read a textbook or a chapter from the start to the finish, when a student tells you nobody else in my class is reading the textbook. So, then does the assistive technology really matter to that student? So it's really a bigger picture that we try to figure out, how do we distill this into that little appointment that they're often willing to give us?
There's a couple of comments in the chat that I'll read out as well. Adam says, we talk about the need to add another tool to your tool belt and how everyone does it throughout life. Yeah, absolutely. Leanna also wrote, the pandemic definitely has changed things. Online learning is happening, and even with in-person learning, at least at our high school, all students have been using Chromebooks. Previously, it may have been only students using AT or a class for a project. Now everyone has technology in front of them, so no one stands out as being the AT user. And some students who may not need it are using it just because it's there and it can make things easier.
I think that's a great point. And what that's speaking to is as we move into that universality of the technology, it's going to change. It'll be a game changer for students with disabilities, not just with technology, but with all supports and resources. Thank you. Those are great points.
So we wanted to share this quote with you. Technology will never replace great teachers, but in the hands of great teachers, it's transformational. And I really feel like this speaks to how important it is for you, they're great high school teachers, to kind of prepare and support students for a successful adaptive technology use. And then for us to pick it up as they come to the post-secondary setting and support that transition into their further education.
So for us, what we really hope to get out of meeting with you today is to share how we can go forward and frame this conversation. So knowing what we do and knowing some of the barriers and the obstacles that we face with training, we're hoping that we can get this dialogue started and that students can start to think about assistive technology differently from the time they even enter high school. So one of the things we ask is, be deliberate when you use the term assistive technology, because then students can connect that to what it is we're trying to offer them or what they're actually legally entitled to, and there may be funding for when they get to the post-secondary setting.
Also, make sure that you're using the assistive technology names. It supports the students' buy-in. It lets them know what they're using, why they're using it, and just helps them to kind of understand the process a bit better.
And the other thing you can do is at a certain point in high school, students start to recognize what track they might be on. I know in Ontario, we have different types of courses depending on which direction you may be heading. So as you start to work with students, you may know somebody's definitely going to be an artist, and you may know somebody's definitely going to, go into something which is a little bit more apprentice-based, and you may know there's somebody who definitely wants to pursue a liberal arts degree. Start to even think or frame the conversation around how technology can even support you as you move into your career, and link for them that there will be specific technologies that will be helpful in your career as you move forward.
It's also important to explain to these students how they can obtain the technology in post-secondary and what their rights are to the technology in the alternative formats as available as well. Students at Mohawk have access to our loaning library, so if they needed a laptop or if they needed a digital recorder to record their lecture, we can provide that to the students. In Ontario, we also do have bursary funding available for students with disabilities. So if they needed a laptop for their program or if they needed any of this equipment to support their learning, there is that available. It's important for students to kind of know what the mandates are and what their rights are in order to get this technology and have access to things like alternative format as well.
And really what it is, it's just beginning to frame that conversation for them as they move forward, and just it's about making, knowledgeable consumers. And as, our next slide says, knowledge is power.
Yeah, so we really hope that one thing that you've gathered from this presentation is that knowledge for students is power. So successful adaptive technology users know the technology, they know how to use it, and they know how to leverage it. They're fluent in a number of different tools and skills. They understand the environment that they're heading towards, whether that's their post-secondary education or their career path, and they understand and they're willing to invest the time that it takes and that's necessary in order to be proficient adaptive technology users. So really, knowledge is power.
And we really think that together we can, kind of elevate what it is we're all doing and make those connections, because ultimately we all want to just see them be successful when they leave both of our environments and they move on to their next setting, which may either be their post-secondary career or their actual career. And we want to say thank you so much. And we just wanted to take the opportunity to open the floor to any questions or comments, or even just to hear a little bit about your experience teaching assistive technology from where you're coming from.
Thank you so much. I have had so many takeaways from this conversation that we've been having this afternoon, and really appreciated that you've raised this discussion around cognitive load. It is a big assumption that we make, and I've been a primary secondary practitioner, and my transitions, I tend to think about that level from primary to secondary, so slightly different field. However, there tends to be an assumption that because you're a young person, you can cope with this wonderful new technology. You'll just absorb it. You know, you're the digital generation. You know what you're doing with mobile phones. And actually, this business of cognitive load is what's missing from that thinking process. If you have a literacy difficulty, or you're needing those supports, or you have a slower speed of processing, that cognitive load is going to stack up, and it's not going to be the case that is something that will be easy for you to understand. So thank you. You've given me some really great thoughts and some terminology around those thoughts that I've been having about that. So that's great. And the other thing that I wanted to say was, again, with my hat on as a primary special ed teacher, is that I think there's a lot that we can do if we start using the language of support and normalizing that language of support right into the very early phases of learning. So I would advocate that perhaps every classroom could have a toolbox, a literal toolbox, and inside that toolbox could be simple things like something you put on your thumb to help you keep your book open, as a piece of technology that supports you to be able to read comfortably. Inside that toolbox for literacy, I'm thinking of particularly at the moment, there might be something that is a coloured overlay that you can explore and see if that helps you, or perhaps maybe a reading window that helps you to focus on a specific piece of text. But you could take it further. You could put the names of apps on stickers and stick that in the box, or have it as a card, or you could have a picture of a reader pen, and you could take that to your teacher and say, I'd like to trade this for a reader pen, and see how that works and have some exploration. And if this became the language that we used right from early phases, this is a toolkit approach to solving problems, and everybody can dip in and use what they need to use, we would be normalizing. And I think this is really crucial, and it helps to address what Adam asked earlier about the $1 million question, by the way, Adam, the destigmatization, because by the time you've reached a secondary phase, the last thing you want to be perceived as is different to your peers and someone who is using something that supports them. And I'd like you to just talk a little bit more, please, about this terminology, assistive. And I'm wondering now if this is a helpful piece of terminology, or perhaps not.
Well, I think, speaking to your point, Julia, when you think about it, why should only a select group of students actually have access to the Chromebook for writing? It's almost unfair for everybody, right? So I know in my daughter's classroom, they wheel in a cart that has a lock, and there are Chromebooks on it, and people are allowed to take a Chromebook for writing assignments. But if you are only allowed to access that because somebody's pulled you out of the room and you had an assessment, and now you've been, given this nice little label that you need that Chromebook, then it's almost like, I don't want to use it in front of you, but then everybody else doesn't want to use it because there's this significance to using that Chromebook. When in reality, and I forget who mentioned it, everybody's using Chromebooks right now, and I bet you it's improving everybody's writing, like using Grammarly, learning to use these features at a young age. Like, why should students not use Google voice typing when they're tired? They have maybe 4 or 5 assignments, or they can't spell a word. There are so many things we could do to just normalizing using assistive technology. It shouldn't be a fight for either end. It shouldn't be that we're fighting for students to have access to it, and it shouldn't be that we're keeping people away from it. It should just be so much more embedded in everything we do. And I think that when we move in that direction, we're going to see that just like people prefer different, fonts, people prefer different types of technology, and you might be using a Chromebook and I might be using Microsoft, and it's all going to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely agree with you. do you know that this pandemic has changed so much? Our ways of working, our ways of thinking about how we support ourselves. Just working at home, I have realized that I need dark mode on every computer. Otherwise, I am exhausted by the end of the day. And I have increased my font size. And it's just because I've had a little bit of time to sit and think, am I really comfortable? Can I make myself comfortable? I know there are some great accessibility features right in front of me. I need to spend a bit of time to investigate that. And it's a self-care thing, actually. Some of it, isn't it? It's about making sure that you're looking after yourself and making yourself comfortable to be able to do the tasks that you absolutely can do really well. Maybe you just need to adopt something slightly different to improve your whole working practice. Yeah, really
I see
encourage.
some interesting public comments. Maybe we could take a quick look at that. Somebody put about the program they are entering. Understanding, what do you believe is the most useful AT tool for students? In gaining an understanding of high school before, I have to scroll through this. Heading to post-secondary, regardless of the program, a broad question I know, but often I find students become very successful using one and acknowledging cognitive load. I try not to overwhelm, at least in initial meetings. I'll tell you what I always tell my students when they ask me which assistive technology is the best. And I always say, whichever assistive technology you're going to use. So I think that the important thing is that we train people to think about technology that, let's face it, we've worked with students who know text to speech. And if you really know text to speech, you can get into any text to speech. You can find it embedded in a learning management system. You can play with that little icon. You know how to make it faster, make it slower. You know how to find that read feature. You can kind of figure out if there's a dictionary. So really what we want to do is try and create fluency with the technology and let them soar with it. And just, if we can get them to use it, to me, that's the most important thing. So that's a great question. I don't know if there's any other comments or questions.
Okay, well, I've got one more, because I'd just like you to talk a little bit more about, it was a little bit earlier on in the presentation when you talked about the different ways that you would introduce technology. And one was a model that was a workshop, and one was a much more instructional kind of model. And I was hoping you might be able to talk a little bit more about what you felt was really effective when training and supporting. I think that it's the apprenticeship students that I have in mind, really, as I'm just about to do some support with some apprentices. So I would like to know, for personally, how I can best guide that group of students. Should I be doing that as a workshop and everybody together if possible?
I think the biggest challenge we have with our apprentices, and I don't know how apprenticeship works in the UK or even in the US, but I know in Canada, our apprentices begin by getting work in their field. Somebody sponsors them. Then they go to work, and then they come to the post-secondary setting. They receive some money from the government to build skills, and then they go back to work. Their salary goes up. Then they come back, and then they finally take this final test. And when they get their qualifications, then they can branch out on their own and actually charge more money. The biggest obstacle our apprenticeship students face is time. And, they've been working, they're in the field, they've got an 8-week program, their boss knows they're there, they know that they're going to need to take this test, and they probably also have a family. So for them, if they're struggling with reading, they need to find the time they're so busy with what they're doing to even know that accessible learning services works, to even know that there's technology, and then to take the time to get there. It's something we actually struggle with as well. When we brought the reader pen to our campus where we have a lot of apprentices, the need was incredible. They all wanted it. But when we actually found the time to get down to the campus, only 2 people showed up because people were busy with so many other things that it was a mismatch between our training and their needs. So I think the best thing is, and this is really where we go back to that model that Joy Zabala talks about, is what does that student need? And if it's time, or if it's bringing the tool, or if it's creating modules, we had a counselor, we were in a meeting this morning, she said they need modules that they can access 10 o'clock at night when their kids are in bed. that's what you've got to do. So if you really want to put technology into the hands of learners, you've got to figure out what it is that they need. And we struggle with it always, and we try and figure it out, and we try and look at the student needs. So that's really my advice to you.
Thank you. And let's tie this up and say it starts with agency and training everybody to be able to say, hey, this is what I need to support my learning going forward. I think that's a really good place to stop, putting it back and ensuring that we empower everybody to be able to say what they need and share that. Okay, we do have, I think, one more question in. There's lots of people saying thank you for your time. So thank you for joining us today. It has been fascinating discussion, very helpful. Giselle says, how do you give workshops while respecting the confidentiality of the students who register within a university access centre?
Do you want to take that one, Haley?
Sure. I think in person versus online, there's some differences as well. When students register with our department, they have access to a number of our different workshops, and we do let them know that they are group presentations, and so there will be other students present. I think that piece of just knowing that is helpful for the student. Right now, while we're online, there's no forcing of students to put their video cameras on, right? So if they would prefer to stay anonymous, they just want to come and get the content, that's okay. They can turn their camera off. If they don't want to have their last name on their video, that's totally fine. Really, the intention is just to provide the students with the resources and the content that we have available in whichever format is most comfortable for them. But if they were coming to an in-person session, we would just let them know that it is group, and that anything that they do choose to disclose will be shared among the group members too.
And I just want to point out that we actually found that to be the active ingredient in what worked in our workshops. So students coming out and having an opportunity to meet with other students with disabilities who are sharing that process of navigating a testing center, booking accommodations, figuring out how to use technology for testing, like being in a community of people who share the same struggles or the same triumphs with you was actually, I think, the active ingredient why the workshops really worked. So we try and always keep the conversation around access and tools. It's not about disability. It's not about, anything stigmatizing, but it's about how you can always become a more powerful learner. And I think when you keep it focused on that, people are happy to be a part of it and share. So thank you for that. It's a good question.
Yeah, students really appreciate that interaction with each other, and I think it kind of creates a bit of a community, and it's great to see. It's really encouraging when I see these students having these conversations. I love it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you so much, Haley. We've appreciated your time today. Thank you to all of us who've been here and appreciating this presentation too. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to end the webinar now. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.